SBP is a disaster recovery and resilience nonprofit working to shrink the time between disaster and recovery. As part of that goal, we have partnered with the Walmart Foundation to present webinars focused on educating disaster recovery leaders to fortify people against unnecessary suffering. SBP has 5 interventions: building efficiently, sharing our model with other organizations, preparing home and business owners through resilience training, advising municipal and state officials, and advocating for policy changes and improvements to the disaster recovery industry. We believe in a holistic approach to disasters, increasing resilience before and streamlining recovery after. We ask that you please join us for our future webinars. The links to register will be available in the slides we send out later today. We have several upcoming events that we'd like to share with you today. We have our Finance Leader course in New Orleans on August 6th through the 8th. This is a 2.5-day course. It brings government leaders and operators together in one room to learn, interact, and gain clarity around some of the biggest challenges facing their recoveries. This is a unique opportunity to connect with and learn from other disaster recovery professionals that are facing similar and novel challenges in their own programs and grants. There is a cost per seat to attend this course. The price is right on the screen. If you are interested, please reach out to me or simply use the link or QR code on the slide to register. The next event is our 2-day disaster housing course in Savannah, Georgia on September 17th through the 19th. This 2-day course has a wide range of key topics to equip leaders to be effective and efficient construction managers. There is a cost per seat to attend these courses. And if you look on the screen, for a nonprofit, it's $1,500, government $2,000, and for-profit $3,000. If you are interested, please reach out to me or simply use the link or QR code on the slide to register. Additionally, we have 2 upcoming events, thanks to a generous grant from the Walmart Foundation. If you are interested in attending any of these 2, please reach out to me for more information or simply use the link or QR code to register. Following us on LinkedIn and Facebook is one of the simplest ways to stay updated on what the advice team is up to on social media. We encourage you to connect with us on both platforms. Now I will pass it over to our disaster recovery advisor, Sherry Risk.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. Appreciate you all making the time today, and super excited to go through and give you some advice about pitfalls that could happen in disaster recovery. So my name is Sherry Risk. I'm a disaster advisor with SBP. I work with the advise team in advising local governments and states. I also work with our SBP Fellows program, which we place fellows in the most vulnerable, low-income areas, highly subject to hazards such as hurricanes and flooding. So some of the common pitfalls in disaster recoveries, if you look at the quote from farmers, we think we know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two. These common pitfalls are things that myself and J.R. Sanderson, Maria, who introduced herself earlier, that we have seen as we've managed state-run disaster recovery programs. And the biggest one is really you need to organize for success. So typically, Housing and Urban Development will make an announcement that a state or a city or a county has been awarded CDBG money, and they would require you to put in an application for that money called an action plan. But you really can organize way before and while you're writing this action plan. You need to organize yourself, both program managers, finance people, project managers, about who is really going to have the accountability to manage the grant monies that you receive. Focusing in on this planning planning way ahead of all of the resources that you will need. Most disaster recovery programs do contract with contractors and outside vendors. You really got to watch and make sure that you build agreements and a process for payment and outcome measures so that you can be successful and not fail in the contract. And as I'm sure you all know, that the more people that you involved in implementing a program, the greater risk is for failure. So when you bring outside help in, outside vendors in, you really need to start thinking about how you want to manage that. So plan way ahead. You don't have to wait until your action plan is approved. Um, don't ever overpromise. I know we all have experienced that when there is a large grant announcement, everyone involved, stakeholders, both the community, local leaders, the project team, there's a lot of possibilities that can go in, but by overpromising, you really set yourself up for failure because there's always way more need than there is money. You must always follow the law. The CDBG-DR money comes in a federal register. You need to follow those rules. Typically, what I've done is just make an outline of what that federal register, get all the key points and laws that you need to do. So you make sure you put that in your policy procedures, your processes, all your legal agreements, and then really get your team together. Most importantly, your finance team, you need to bring them to the table right from the beginning with your program managers so you can review the law, talk about what kind of programs you're going to have, and really set the roles and responsibilities for everyone. If you fail to make a decision and you keep that lingering, then that will just extend the time that you can actually utilize the funding and push out the programs so you can, help those who have been impacted by the disaster. And although you make all of these planning way ahead of time and you start to outline your organization and vendors that you'll need and you go over the laws, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't adapt as the whole time frame of the recovery happens. You should be ahead of things, uh, you know, put up on a whiteboard all of the possible obstacles because you will need to adapt because we all know that as you apply law and rules to reality, you're going to learn things through the journey. So you need to adapt. You need to be careful about political interference, about political promises and things that may not necessarily be able to be done because it doesn't follow the law. Next, please. So, a failure to organize for success. You're going to have a lot of citizens and stakeholders that are impacted by the disaster. You're going to have political demands and the priorities therein that implies. And you're also going to have a lot of stakeholder demands, whether that be nonprofit groups, it could be outside vendors, it could be anyone that has been impacted by the disaster or anyone who's interested in having influence over it. So there's going to be a lot of demands. And you have to be careful because if those don't match what you're capable of, then you won't be successful. We can only get so much done in the time that is in the day. So being really cognizant and aware of all of the voices, all the noise that's going to come your way, you have to match that to your capabilities. So really, in order to do that, you've got to sit down and say, what is my mission? When this is done, what is the measurable outcome that I want to see from this? And how you go about this is you first would do a needs assessment. You would get from FEMA the disaster cost and estimates that they've done. You would look at statistical data. You would look at the stakeholders and the citizens through public hearings, and you really formulate what is really needed and put the facts down because you're going to experience a lot of assumptions and I heard this, I heard that, this is my understanding. So you really need to document the needs assessment. Then that will show you what the top needs are, whether it be housing, infrastructure, acquisition, planning. And from that, you will develop an implementation plan. And the implementation plan is a combination of what the needs are, thus developing a program such as, let's say, housing. And then the implementation plan is the capacity of your organization to deliver it. Do you have the right people at the table as far as the accountants, an attorney, program managers, project managers, environmental review specialists, all of that? And the implementation plan is outlining how you'll bring all of these individuals, all of these skills together in order to meet the needs. And then all of this is put into the action plan. And the action plan is HUD's word for the document you submit to get the funding official sign a contract. But the great thing about an action plan too is it is one document where everyone can read and understand they've decided, the state has decided, or the county's decided these were the needs, i.e., let's say that's housing. So they've developed a housing program. And then you, in the action plan, inform the public about how to apply, when they can apply, how the application will be scored, and all of these things. So it's a great document that everybody's reading from the same page. It helps with transparency, clarity, and really the place that you have to go to follow the laws. So these are some of the things that you can ask yourself as you're going through your implementation plan. Do you have a system of record? You don't want to get yourself in a position where you're pushing papers around. A system of record's a great place because you can scan documents in, you can keep an individual file on every single project, whether it's multiple housing projects, multiple infrastructure projects, and then you can give access to those team members, or let's say case managers or program managers, that they can actually go in and document what's going on with the individual project, have their eligibility and requirements been met. That way you're not pushing papers around because, as we all know, things can get lost. You need to ask yourself, do you have the capacity to carry this out? Do your accounting staff, do they understand 2 CFR 200, which is the federal government's overall guidance for how to handle finances, how to handle separation of duties and accounting, what laws need to be, what rules need to be put into your agreements, both with vendors and also, as in the case of the state, the pass through that has to then put an agreement together when they award it to a city, a county, or an individual. And you need to look at all of this and say, do we have the staffing to cover all the functions? And the main functions being finance, program management, project management, contracting, inspecting, case management, all of that, and really build an org chart and identify roles, responsibilities of the staffing. And this leads to the structure. So you have a structure now to implement the program, but you also need to have the ability to coordinate between both internally and externally. You always want to be transparent to all of everyone who's impacted by the disaster and who possibly could access the money so they can recover. You can use 5% of admin for the entire grant. So if you're awarded 100 million, you can use 5% for admin money. But remember, in the case of a disaster recovery, a CDBG-DR grant, you have 6 years in time to manage it. So the 5% has to last over the 6 years. So this will key you into how much can I afford? What can I pay? What are my pay scales? How much money can I afford on contracting and inspectors? Once you figure that out, you can hire full-time, temporary time, because at the end of the 6 years, when the grant's over, you don't want employees that then they find themselves, they have nothing to do. And then now the grant money is finished. Thus the admin is finished. Next slide, please. So one of the areas that is a common pitfall and is extremely pervasive through all the CDBG-DR grants is a failure in your contracting. And this is when you hire a contractor to build a house, rehab a house, reconstruct. It could be separation. In the case of infrastructure, it could be separation of storm water and sewer. It could be building a new public facility, let's say a 911 Metro Center. And where the failure comes in is when you go through the bid process to hire the contractor, if you write a bad contract, then you don't really have any accountability from the contractor. So the example I would give is you need to put in there all the federal labor laws. You need to put in there what the outcome is. And this could be all the details of what the house plan is, what kind of roof are you going to put on, and putting in a timeline and putting in things like percent to complete and also remedies in that contract if the project is delayed. Because I think everyone, if you haven't experienced, I'm sure you have experienced, there's all kinds of reasons like, well, it's going to rain or it did rain or these kinds of things, weather, or I couldn't get materials. So you definitely want to put in remedies for delays or non-compliance. If you don't have a contract without the metrics and milestones, then you don't have any way to hold the contractors accountable. Delays happen, then you don't help the people that are needing to recover. You don't adhere to the laws, and also there's 6 years to spend the grant, so you would actually could get hit with a finding from HUD for lack of timeliness. So also, as I said, for in the contract, you should put a failure to comply, because in the programs that I've seen, there's always a few contractors that are fired. They're let go from the program because they're not performing. So a bad contract really lends itself to slow outcomes, paying for things that don't have an outcome. You could get a finding from HUD or OIG, not follow the laws, and no one is going to accept just blaming the contract. You have to go back to a document and have accountability built in there so you can have remedies to that to get the contractor to perform. Um, and the big failure is you could lose your grant dollars, you can lose public trust, and then you don't build the houses or the infrastructure needed of what this grant was intended for. Next slide, please. So some ways to avoid this failure: everyone on the team needs to know what the contract said. So when you write the contract and you write a really great contract, this isn't just a contract for a project manager or a program manager. You need to have a kickoff meeting and you go over all of the particulars of the contract with the contractor there, so everyone knows, with the inspector there. But also you need to share the contract with your finance team, because that's who you will be submitting invoices to, and they need to see what the pay schedule or any kind of particulars around finance, they need to know what it says before they execute the payment. Also, by being really transparent and having a kickoff meeting, then you can say, and I even had where everybody at that kickoff meeting signed, we took minutes and we signed the documents, because later if the contractor says, well, I didn't know that was in the contract, you can get that out and say, no, we went over that. We had the meeting, we took minutes, we signed it, and this is a way to hold them accountable. It's not the contractor's fault if you wrote a bad contract. It's not the program's fault if you don't share the contract with everybody who has a responsibility outlined in that contract. And if the contract fails to perform, then you fire them and move on. You do that because you're just delaying it and you're not serving the people for which this money was intended for. Next, please. So planning. I love planning. I plan early. I plan often. I often say I'm like queen of checklists. Better to start. You may not know all of the facts. You will know that you were awarded the money. You may not get the Federal Register with the particular rules and laws about the CDBG-DR, but you can start ahead to start planning about, who do I currently have? What kinds of things do I know just from knowing about the disaster? And you can start to draft a plan. You're definitely going to be updating it as you get the register and you start to look at your staffing and capacity. But you should do this as soon as you know that you possibly are going to get the CDBG-DR money. You need to start drafting basically a to-do list. You need to start planning. Once you get the Federal Register, then you would update your plan to then incorporate any requirements in that Federal Register. So if you had planned to do a particular activity and maybe that register doesn't allow for it, you can just take that out of your plan. And then the federal cross-cut requirements, these are common requirements across all federal funding. Examples are environmental review, procurement and bidding, the 2 CFR 200, which outlines procurement, bidding, what kind of agreements you should have, how you should be paying bills, how you're audited. Those don't change. They're not dependent on getting the Federal Register for the CDBG-DR. So you can contemplate those, start looking at those and building them into your plans early. Um, and don't write a poor action plan. The action plan needs to have actionable items in it. If you are awarded, let's say, $100 million, you've done a needs assessment, you need to be specific about what kind of housing you're going to do, who can apply, what the application looks like. You don't want to write a flowery action plan. You want to write an action plan that has actionable items and is very transparent about the programs that you're going to offer and what the maxes are, what work you're willing to do. And you need to put in the action plan specifics around when and how the applications will be available, what's contained in them, and your merit system for reviewing. So do not build an inaction plan. You will then have multiple amendments, upwards of 20 plus amendments. And every time you do an amendment, you have to put that out for public comment. So then you're just delaying your timelines again. Every time it goes out for public comment, depending on the Federal Register, it's 30 to 45 days for a comment period before you can ever take an action on amending the action plan. So then again, you're delaying the timeliness of pushing the grant money out and helping people. Next, please. So avoid it. Avoid the failure in planning. Use your CDBG-DR network, or you can ask us. You can call our advised team and ask us for help. J.R. Sanderson managed South Carolina. He had the most successful housing program of all the CDBGs. He spent his money timely, wisely, few amendments, set expectations. He held contractors accountable. I myself was a subject matter expert for West Virginia CDBG-DR monies, as well as the program manager for CDBG-DR MIT, mitigation activities. In the example of mitigation, I knew we were funded the money. I was waiting on the Federal Register, but I didn't wait for that, and I didn't wait to do my planning. I started ahead and said, who typically is managing these kinds of funds in the state of West Virginia? Let me get them on and teach them crosscuts. I did tutorials on environmental reviews. I did, well, it was during pandemic. Excuse me. I did webinar tutorials on procurement, on how to do a contract. I did all of that months before the action plan was turned in. Now, if I had chosen not to make them, those people, the applicants, or to assist the applicants, they're still trained, because I knew that from past experience with disaster recovery, this was typically the stakeholders that were involved, like engineers, historical preservation specialists. And so I rolled the training out, and it was well received in the fact that they had a lot of new turnover on their staff. They hadn't got training for a while. So it really level set everybody and kind of, stretched their muscles before the applications went out. So I knew what I wanted to accomplish. I knew that I needed to do a refresh on all the regulations I knew would be the same. I knew that the actors in the vendors and actors primarily would be the same as they had been in former CDBG programs. Then I made my plan and I executed it. So when you need to change, you can also adapt and you can make the plan, but you need to make that decision early and change. Adaptability to me is anticipating what you think might be changed. A lot of that could be on past performance, working with individuals in your community. It can also be from monitorings or audits. A good place to go is to look at the single audits of maybe cities or counties that you might be funding with infrastructure. In the case of individuals, it could be you've looked at how maybe you've done case management in the past, so you can tighten that up and make that program policy procedures. If you fail to get the plan right, everything will go down very fast, and then you will be wasting time to make adjustments to it. So again, rely on your CDBG-DR network. Also, if you've got CDBG in your state, that's somewhat similar to DR. You can rely on, if you're doing infrastructure or housing projects, you may have a housing fund. You may have infrastructure review at your state level. engineering, surveyors, contractors that typically bid. Know your network. And as always, we're happy that if you call us, we can advise you to it, advise you to the things that you need to think about when you're planning. Next slide. So again, if you fail to plan ahead, don't beat yourself up. Or don't beat others up, because really you're the one to blame. And I always say that instead of worrying about all the things you can't control, just start making your list of the things that you can control. What do you know on day one? And what you know on day one, you can make the plan and get a head start on whether it's training, whether it's data that you need. You will need data from the FEMA. So FEMA comes in after a disaster, and they go out and do disaster inspections, and they have all of that data. They submit it so they know how much funding for FEMA to put in that area. Get a FEMA data agreement early. Do it literally a minute after you start planning. There are things that you can control. You could control getting a data agreement. You can control, starting to write down the kind of employees you need, um, because things will change and you need to write down the plan ahead of time. You don't have anyone else to blame but yourself if you fail to plan. So it's a nerve-wracking time when you know you're about to receive a large amount of money. So it gave me comfort as a leader. Let me write down everything I know from the network I work in. Let me write down the things that I do know won't change, such as environmental review. And I'll write all the knowns down and make a plan for that. And then I'll write down all the unknowns and put a time frame to, I better get to know when I'm going to know that piece so I can build it into the plan. Next, please. So again, plan for the disaster you're most likely to have. In the case of West Virginia, we have tremendous flooding. So we plan for flooding. When we knew we were going to get $106 million in mitigation money, I immediately knew that our highest hazard was flooding. So if I'm going to make infrastructure improvements, I keyed myself in knowing it involved either taking things out of the 100-year floodplain, elevating them in the 100-year floodplain, or just plain putting them in the 5-year floodplain. And I also know that's really difficult to do because we're a mountainous state. So there's not a lot of land available once you get out of the 100-year floodplain. In the case of South Carolina, they know that the high hazard is hurricanes. Based on previous disasters, and this data is available, that's what you should plan for. And you build that into the hazard that you think may likely happen. In the case of West Virginia, it was flooding. We knew we could go to our state emergency management department, and we could look at previous declarations in FEMA and sort of the kinds of actual structures, whether it be housing or infrastructure, culverts, bridges that typically are damaged. So we could build that in. That was something that was a known that we could control. So we started outlining that in anticipation for the register. You don't have to be elaborate. My to-do lists, planning seems really grandiose and fancy, but really it was a legal pad and a pen writing down everything I could possibly think of, bringing in all of our federal grant staff so they could poke holes in it. You forgot this, you forgot that, add this, add that. I'm not sure we really need that. That didn't work last time. I'm a big believer in bringing in your teammates. That too is a strength because everyone has a different lens, a different experience, a different background. So just keep it simple. Bring in the people who've worked with this before. Let them poke holes in it, or fill the holes, or add something new. HUD is very clear about their rules, their deadlines. They're very straightforward in the Federal Register. So again, I went into the register and just made an outline and bullet pointed. They are very clear about it, so you need to meet that. You can't say, well, I didn't know that was this, or I didn't know that was that. They have HUD Exchange, which has really a lot of training webinars. And again, I mentioned this before, establish key relationships. Your state EMD or county, that is who receives the FEMA money. They go out and do the disasters. They have a lot of knowledge about the kind of impacts that happen, and the kind of cost estimates and sort of things that can be done with their money. So they're a wealth of knowledge. Um, have a relationship with HUD. If you've never received DR money, you are receiving, your city or county or state is probably most likely receiving community development block grant money. You could go, utilize their HUD rep. Also, SBA and NFIP, Small Business Administration, they provide loans when you're in the FEMA phase. So the FEMA and the National Flood Insurance Program, all of this data and management is at your EMD office in your state. So again, rely heavily on your emergency management department. Also seek out maybe existing community development staff at your municipality to get some insight ahead of time. You can also go on HUD Exchange and read other federal registers. For other CDBG-DR, they're not always the same. The registers do change. So although a previous register might have some insight, I wouldn't plan specific to that law. You'll have to meet the new one that's going to be released in conjunction with your disaster. And then again, I said this before, data sharing and all of the FEMA, SBA, and NFP. As soon as you get your legal pad out and you start writing your plan out, the next thing you need to do is start to get into a data sharing agreement so you can get the information for more detail to plan. Next slide, please. Don't overpromise. Don't have a Christmas tree. You cannot be everything to everybody. There will be a lot of pressure from stakeholders and political influence, media, you name it, social media. You can't be all things to all people. There's not going to be enough federal money to fix everything that's been damaged. So you really got to concentrate on focusing in on the unmet need and pick a key program where you can really get things done and manage through all the process, policy, procedures, rules, and such. There's a lot of pieces to the rules, policy, procedures, and your plans. If you're everything to everybody, you're going to be bringing, all of these programs through complex rules and regulations. Follow the needs assessment. It will glean a ton of data that'll show you what needs to be done, and pick the top needs. And don't have, the tree here to the left, a multitude of programs. Always do what you said you would do. I used to always coach the teams, don't guess at an answer, don't promise things that you don't know the details to. Say, when you say you're going to do something, you need to do it. If you don't do that, you will lose trust, you'll have complaints, you'll ruin your credibility. And going forward, it is tremendously difficult to build that back, that trust and credibility. And that will then suck time out of the time that you've got to spend the CDBG-DR money. So always do what you said you were going to do. A promise is a promise, and trust is a very key thing in managing these grants. Trust, transparency. Many, many programs that we've advised and we've worked with have been over-designed, not built capacity to support that design, maybe not brought the finance people in. I brought the finance people on day one because they're the ones that are going to be paying the bills. So they're very over-designed and they're under-managed, and then over-promised and falling to political pressure. And then you just degrade the trust. The transparency is not there, and you'll spend a lot of time rebuilding that instead of just building houses. Next, please. Follow the law. I teach a class into CFR 200, which is, again, it is the overall federal law about finances, procurement, legal agreements, all of these things. You've got to follow the law. When a grantee doesn't do that, it always gets them in trouble. We see them time and time again failing to follow the Federal Register or federal crosscut requirements. A pervasive one I've seen is, well, why can't we just go ahead and dig the footer for the house? Well, you've not passed an environmental review. You have to pass it and clear it. It has to be signed, dated, and nothing can be done. Not any decision, not a shovel in the ground can be done till after the date where you've cleared the project. You think that maybe you can catch up a little time here and there. You will not. You will have to go back and either get a finding, OIG, pay the money back. It's not worth it. It's better to outline all the laws, to build the capacity and to train and build a streamlined process with a few programs than it is to cut corners on things like that. Common areas of HUD findings, I just named the first one, environmental law, environmental review. I've seen it time and time again as a program manager. I was a program manager at the state. I also, a long time ago, was a program manager at the city of Charleston. Time and time again, all those involved wanted to take shortcuts on the environmental review. And I adamantly said, absolutely not. You can't even make a decision to pursue the project, put a shovel in the ground until we have full clearance and also HUD approving it. So if you do the full environmental review and you submit it to HUD and they give you authority to use grant funds, which is their approval on March 1, you better not do anything with that project till after March 1. Duplication, this is not date of birth, this is duplication of benefit law. The Stafford Act is the act that is overarching in the United States for disaster response and recovery. The first funding that comes in is the FEMA response comes in. So really what duplication of benefit is not allowed in the Stafford Act. And what it comes down to is an individual or a city, county, whatever the program may be, they cannot use money for the same purpose from multiple sources. So if they were going to have their roof redone and they received FEMA money, you can't use FEMA money and then use HUD money. So you can't double dip and do that. You're not allowed to do duplication of benefits. The way FEMA calculates it is a little bit different than HUD, and the sources, recently, the duplication of benefit Federal Register was updated by HUD. I would caution you to be very up to date on the rules around duplication of benefit. Train, and then train some more. This is a very key area where we find problems there. And then contracting and procurement law. The HUD is going to come in. They will look at your procurement. They will look and see if you bid it. They will look and see if you follow procurement law, which projects over 250,000 have to be a sealed bid. They're going to make sure that you followed all that. You are required to write a policy procedure. That's when you pull the bidding and procurement laws from 2 CFR 200. They're going to make sure that you followed your policy procedures. So if you said that you're only going to do X, in your bidding process, they will follow it and ask for the documentation and make sure you not only followed 2 CFR 200, they're going to make sure that you followed your policy procedures. Now, I will tell you with all of these common areas and the failure to follow the law, the best way to stay ahead of this is to, well, one, follow the law, two, write policy procedures. And then in your system of record, you need to document that you followed every single step of your process. And that documentation is the proof that you followed the law. That's why the system of record is so important, and you don't want files laying around. I have this paper here, that paper there. You want to have a trail of all of what's happened in the progression of the project, and then that trail will be your documentation that you did adhere to the law. So know it and follow it. I have had instances where I've helped grantees that they did not know what was in the Federal Register. You have to know the Federal Register. A program manager that I worked with had the Federal Register printed and highlighted, and the tabs were worn from referring to it. And I was like, wow, that's really the name of the game. You're doing this the right way. So the bottom line is know it and follow it. Next, please. So failure in your financial operations, whenever I teach finances or the 2 CFR 200, I always say that the finance department is they're my best friends. And people laugh, but it's true. I bring them in on day one. Hey, guess what? We just got awarded money. I'm expecting a register in 2 months. As soon as I get it, I'm forwarding you a copy. like you to read it. We're going to have a meeting. Questions, concerns about everything. So bring them in early, let them know, because they're going to have to allow for the time. And they have to build financial processes. They have to build financial policy procedures, because they too are going to be looking at the invoices and they can detect if there's a problem. And not only do you have to have the policy procedure, but you have to follow the flow of that. There's been many times that project managers have submitted an invoice and the finance operations, because they've built a good process with that handoff, they have detected issues and problems. An example of that is, you want to pay your contractors on time. Money brings interested parties to the table. If they're not getting paid timely, then they're going to walk away. So if you have a contractor who is doing all the things that are supposed to do, and a month or two has passed and you've not paid, they're going to walk, because they cannot afford to keep going without their cash flow. So if you ignore your finance team, you're going to have a big problem later. If you don't bring the finance to the table to read the Federal Register and build processes and policy procedures, it's not them that are going to have to talk to the contractor because an invoice went there and it's got caught in some, deep hole of finance. And I'm sorry, we can't pay the bill for 4 weeks. Then you get no work done. The disaster survivors aren't assisted. And then word gets around in the contractor community. They're going to let other people know, hey, don't work for them. They don't pay. They don't pay well. Then when the contractors walk away, then you're not spending money. HUD has a slow spenders list. They publish it monthly. You'll be on that list. When you are on that list, the CDBG-DR reports are public, both at the federal level, and there are politicians that, in some cases, there's a flood committee or some kind of thing like that. They'll get interested and they want to know, why is this particular entity on this list? What is going on? So reworking costs program time, people, money. You'll end up losing your contractors and you'll end up on the slow spender list. Then you're spending your time explaining to all the calls that you're getting, and also homeowners why their houses aren't being built. Why isn't the work being done? Next, please. So a way to avoid this is, day one, invite them, get them the register, have them read it, go through it. When you have the meeting, you go through questions and concerns. You want to have policy procedures and a workflow of how to pay invoices. And then the big thing that we used in all of our projects were checklists. So we went down through checklists. What has to be checked? What's the handoff of the report? That kind of thing. Then we had our internal monitoring team. They would go in and spot check and QA QC invoices. They went in all through the course of the project. So don't wait and have them look at the end, because then it's too late. So they're actually checking. So your project manager's checking, the program manager's signing off, you're turning it over to your finance operations, and then your monitoring your monitoring team is then going in and doing QA QC. If you see a trend of something that seems to be a problem, you need to be proactive, get ahead of it, standing calls with your contractors. If there's a reoccurring theme, more training, roll out more training to your outside project managers in the case of infrastructure projects. You can see, if you have a checklist and QA QC, you can see things trending and get ahead of it. And then hold your finance team to be proactive as well. Don't let them think that, well, only the project manager is the one that's going to make sure that this invoice is correct. It's just as much as their responsibility to make sure that it's correct too. And the way that you can do that is to bring them to the table to begin with, because they may have to hire some new staff or do something a different way, or there's something not negotiable because the state auditor's office processes checks. So knowing all that ahead of time helps them also build their team, as well as be accountable. Because if you take notes and you build things from that, you can say, well, you agreed to this and you said that wouldn't be a problem. Just always remember, fast cast makes fast friends, and you can't have contractors building, infrastructure and houses if you're not going to make sure that the payments are timely. But at the same time, you have to make sure you follow the rules So this is a great way to do it in your finance operations. Next, please. Making decisions. So a lot of times what we see is that people fail to make decisions. It's very, it's very daunting. You have several $1 million and a lot of people need to be recovered. There's a lot of people involved in this. But when you don't make decisions, it will cause delays in the program, and it allows programs to get bigger, or I'm sorry, it allows problems to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So by not making the decision, it's only going to get worse. When you build the capacity part of it and you decide how you're going to staff the CDBG-DR, with all of the roles, you need to make responsibilities. So who gets to make decisions on what? Who gets to decide that we're going to do a new program? Who gets to decide at what level of invoice is going to be approved without this sign off or that sign off? And you need to do process charts on this so everybody knows what they're allowed to make decisions on, or what needs to be discussed with someone else with that decision making. A lot of times people are afraid to change. This is a lot of pressure, but failure to make the decision, it's just you're overloaded. Then everyone gets tired. Everyone gets negative. Then you start to doubt yourself and become uncertain. So leaders get paid to make decisions. So make the decision. Next, please. So have a decision-making process. So, and socialize this and share this with all of your team, so everyone is informed. Typically, there's a disaster problem. You've got to decide the scope and size of what it is. Then you start to outlay ways to solve it to meet your strategy to make the decision, and bring all the key leaders in. In our case, it was our secretary level person. It was the director of all our federal grants, not just CDBG-DR. It was key members of the flood committee. It was program managers that had lots of experience running grants who came in and were part of the team to develop the action plan, the unmet needs, and work together so those decisions could be made. That way, you have alignment through all the leaders, you have transparency, there's no surprises. Then the decision is made, record it. Make sure you document everything. If there is an executive decision, make sure there is a memorandum, an email, some sort of thing. Put it in your system of record, but make sure you document every single decision. I always say that you need to document everything as if someone picked up the record 1,000 years later to see why was this decision made. Because if you're like me, I can't remember what was on my grocery list 3 weeks ago, or maybe what my to-do list was without putting it in my notepad on my phone. So have a process. Also have a process if you have emergency decisions. Sometimes you're not afforded a week or two to work through a big problem. So if there's an emergency decision, you need to have a more streamlined process. Usually this is a review committee that meets twice a week that can be activated to make decisions. And you need to document this whole decision-making chain so everyone wants to know. Because really, people just want to know, what do you expect of me and what am I responsible for? So they're more comfortable as they make the decision. So, but at the end of the day, with everything, you should always keep in mind that you're doing this for the disaster survivor. That's the purpose of it, and the program is meant for them. A lot of times, it's very overwhelming to get involved with laws, paperwork, a lot of outside opinion, inside opinion, and you lose sight. What I always told the project teams, we are here because there is someone who is trying to recover from a disaster. And don't forget that. Always have that forefront in your mind. Next, please. So the failure to adapt, if you don't adapt, if you stay frozen, um, then you would stop your program or you can derail it. If you don't adapt and make a decision, if you see a trend happening that you need to contemplate making a program change, you need to be able to adapt. So you can determine what the issue is in your current program, by having monitors look at it, QC/QA, you can see trends so you can train, or you can make a programmatic change. Through all the unmet need, you felt that maybe these were the things that you were going to do. But then as you started to implement the program and you got out, you realized that maybe there was a component that you didn't consider. Um, so you need to be able to adapt to that. One of the best things that has helped me, and one of the things that we advise those who we assist, is always go back and look at past programs. If you've never received CDBG-DR funds, you can even look back. Your state, city, county has in some time received federal monies. Always look at the past programs, because you're going to see the coulda, woulda, shoulda done, the issues of that. Make sure you build that into the new program. That's the beauty of having past programs, is you get to look and see, well, that didn't really work, so we're really not going to do that. Adapting causes you need to do it rapidly, and you need to make decisions, and you got to keep moving. You cannot be frozen, because the problem will only get bigger. Also, if you're receiving CDBG-DR funds, you will have a HUD representative. I always recommend that you have frequent calls with them to know if there's any possible changes coming. You can also sign up on HUD Exchange, because it will notice email notices if the Federal Register changes. So just because you got CDBG-DR and you had an initial Federal Register doesn't mean there won't be changes as the program goes through. And this is a good way to get noticed. Next, please. Political influence, often don't have control over it. A good way to manage it is to keep your officials informed. Be transparent. What programs are you offering? What is the progress of the program? Have a dashboard. Keep the officials informed. If you're meeting, if you have a secretary or a governor's office or a mayor, a county manager, have update meetings, have standing update meetings to keep them informed about the progression of the CDBG-DR. And CDBG-DR, you have to submit quarterly reports. And that's a great way to socialize that around and let people know where you are in the process. So you also have to really be attuned to what the political environment is in your area, and see what kinds of things are they interested in, their priorities. So you build your data that you are informing them with status meetings. You can make sure if there's one piece of data they want to see a progress on, you've built it in. Be very careful, because if you succumb to politics, you will end up with a Christmas tree, because everyone has a different opinion about what they think is the most important. And how you prove that you don't have a Christmas tree is the unmet need, and walking through the process of by which you develop the programs in your action plan. Failing programs, JR, myself, Maria, others in our organization, failing programs always blame political interference. You can manage this. You can manage it by keeping them informed and being transparent. Next, please. So keys to avoiding, make sure you have political talk cover from your executive branch. For me, when I was working in it, I had the backing of my secretary for my division, had status meetings with him. He had me backed up, and helped, and that empowered me to do what I needed to do. We had briefings both with our flood committee of the legislature. We also met with floodplain managers and mayors and county commissioners, whether we were doing individual housing or infrastructure. We kept a standing meeting to keep them informed about where we were in the project. And whenever it was like, well, can you build something, I don't know, an example of something, we brought out the policies and said, that's not allowable. That's not allowable. That doesn't follow the rule. And we were able to have that documented to show them we can't do that. You can make an ally of the political leader if you keep them informed, if you show them where you are in their progress, and that you're willing to listen, that you're working on it, and always communicate. You can never over communicate with them, to be very transparent. That's how you keep the allies with the political influence that you will experience. Next, please. That is the end. So Maria, if you've got any questions in the question box, I do want to thank you all. I always get excited when people come and get on our webinars and learn about this. Uh, there's a lot of federal money out there for CDBG-DR, and there are a lot of rules, but these are some tips how to process through those, the pitfalls that you can experience. And as I said, SBP, we are here. We advise people quite often and bring a lot of experience. So thank you for attending today, Maria.
Thank you so much, Sherry. There are no Q&A, so I'll go ahead and move on. Um, Sorry. As a reminder, we do ask that you please join us for our future webinars. Don't forget to register today to attend one of our courses that are coming up. If you are interested in learning more about SBP Advise offerings, please contact us at advise@sbpusa.org. Again, don't forget to follow us on social media. We look forward to meeting with you on future webinars or in person at one of our courses. We will be emailing out the slide deck from today, so look out for that in your inbox. Thank you again on behalf of SBP and the Walmart Foundation. Have a great rest of your day.